Hey, the kids are released, at least the first through sixth grade, or the preschool, kindergarten go here. First through sixth grade, follow Jane right back there. The older kids are going to stay with us today. I guess they want you to hear about the resurrection too, so that's okay. Anyhow, all right. Well, happy Easter. What a day. It's a little rainy, and hopefully we'll get our photo shoot in. I want you guys to turn in the Gospel of John, chapter 11. And we've been in a series of messages on why Jesus, why trust him, why put our faith in him, why follow him, why give our lives to him. And so we've been answering that question. Well, one really good reason to follow Jesus is that unlike any other religious teacher, philosopher, spiritual teacher that's ever existed in the history of man, Jesus is alive. Okay, he's still with us, and he always will be. He's eternally alive. He rose from the dead. We're celebrating that fact today, and it's kind of a pretty good reason to follow him, I would think. But there's more. It's not just that Jesus rose from the dead. The really cool thing is that he has the power to give us life too. That we can be raised from the dead. And one of the best stories in the Bible that confirm this is a story in John 11 about Jesus raising this guy by the name of Lazarus. How many of you know that story? You remember that story? And we find it's the whole chapter, John chapter 11. And it's in this story that Jesus makes this amazing claim. In John 11, verses 25 and 26, this is what Jesus says. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Wow, that's pretty amazing. I mean, who can say that? Only Jesus, and it's pretty astounding. So today I want us to look at this astounding claim and look at the story in John 11. However, as I was going to preach through this, I kind of had in my mind what I was going to preach. I've preached on it before a few times. I thought, yeah, they need to hear this. As I read this story for about the 1,000th time in my life, certain phrases kept jumping out at me for this time. It's never happened, like this. And so I thought, I'm just going to talk about these phrases that kind of speaking to me, and there's a number of them, and I'm hoping that one or two of these will ring your bell, okay? So I kind of threw out my message and said, this is what we're going to do. We're just going to read through this story and look at these phrases. You with me? So let's start. John chapter 11, verse 1, Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. The first phrase that struck out to me was how the sisters, when your brother was sick, they sent word to Jesus. And that's exactly the right thing to do. Mary and Martha were devoted followers, okay? And what we learn from them is when we're facing difficult times, especially life and death situations, send word to Jesus, right? So that was the phrase that got me first. My problem is I don't always do that. I don't know how you are. When I face problems, I got to go try to solve it myself for a while before I go, oh yeah, I guess I better send word to Jesus and pray about it, right? So some of you can relate to that. And so the problem is when I go off on my own, it's not only a waste of time, it makes matters worse. So if you're going to experience Jesus as the resurrection and life, when you're facing the hard times, send word to Jesus, okay? Next, verse 4. When he heard this, by the way, they sent word to Jesus, and what we're going to discover is their prayers were not answered the way they were hoping. That's kind of a key part of this story, okay? So in verse 4, when he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end to death. No, it's for the God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, yet when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. He stayed 2 days. What's going on here, These women who loved him, followed him, were praying to him, and he stayed. And the fact of the matter is, because he delayed, Lazarus died. Can you imagine the disappointment of Mary and Martha, who they'd watched him do miracles? And Jesus, instead of rushing to their aid, took a sweet time. I got to tell you at this point, we need to just point out how sometimes when we're going through hard times and we pray, God and Jesus can be very annoying. Right? And what we discover is that God has a whole different timetable than we do. He's got other things going on. And, we just need to be prepared to live by God's timetable, because God's timetable is always better than ours. But it's hard. So if we're going to experience Jesus as the resurrection of life, we need to just be prepared to realize that God has a different timetable than we do, and sometimes the answers don't come when we want them to come, right? Okay. Let's jump to verse 11. It says, he went on to tell his disciples, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going to wake him up. I love that. And Jesus' disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he'll get better. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. I love that phrase. He's going to wake them up, And so while he delayed, Lazarus died. And again, you can imagine the disappointment of Mary and Martha. So much for prayer. I mean, they're praying that God will heal him. Lazarus dies. So they think that's the end of it. So they're pretty depressed. And there are times that prayer doesn't seem to work, right? I mean, we've probably been through that a few times. So Jesus decides it's time to go, and he's going to wake Lazarus up. That's my favorite phrase. I could have done a sermon on that phrase alone. And because you see, there's a whole lot of people today who need to be woke up. In fact, the Bible says people are spiritually dead. In Ephesians chapter 2, it says, as for you, you are dead in your transgressions and sins in which you used to live when you followed the ways of this world. There's a lot of people in this world that are dead in their sins and need to be woke up. There's a lot of people in church who need to be woke up, right? And you can even be a Christian and need to be woke up. Some of you here today probably need to be woke up. I'm just saying. And Paul was talking to Christians in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 14, when he said, wake up, O sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine from you. And as Christians, we fall asleep spiritually. We get used to being a Christian. We get used to coming to church, and we start just going through the motions. And we need to be woke up. Easter's a good day to wake up, right? It's a good day to wake up and renew your relationship with God. So to experience Jesus as the resurrection life, we need to let Jesus wake us up. So look at verse 14. So then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I'm glad I was not there so that you may believe. Now, that's a really important statement, because what we discover here is that God already had a plan and a purpose. This delay was not by accident. He had a plan and a purpose. God always has a plan and a purpose, and his plan and his purpose is always bigger than our plan and purpose. And see, God's plan is always to expand our belief and trust in him. But in order for that to happen, he has to let us go through some hard times. He has to let us go through difficulties. He has to push us to the edge where, man, I don't think he's going to do it. And then he comes through, and we realize, he always comes through. I've been following Jesus a long time. He always comes through. But even now, he pushes me to my limits. God, are you going to come through? He's not going to come through. He's going to fail me this time. And he always comes through. And God's plan is bigger. So, if we're going to experience Jesus as the resurrection of life, we need to be open to this bigger plan that God has. But Mary, in our story, was struggling with this, just like we struggle. And this is the first phrase that really got to me. Look at verse 17. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been dead in the tomb for 4 days. 4 days. Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. And when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him. But Mary stayed home. Wow. Mary stayed home. Remember, this is the Mary who anointed Jesus' feet with expensive perfume and wiped it with her hair. Talk about devotion. So she's at this, high, intense devotion. Jesus shows up and she stays home. Wow. She's having troubles. I think she's ticked off at Jesus. I think she's depressed. She's like, why couldn't he come? Have you ever been kind of disappointed in God? I think Mary was struggling with that, and so she stays home. Let's not judge her too harshly, though, because Jesus is here. Jesus is in this place right now. He's here every Sunday when we're together, every time. How many of you stayed home? You know, and by the way, those of you online, I'm not picking on you. You're taking out time in your day and you're with us. But there's people who are home. And the problem with staying home is when you stay home, you miss the miracle. When we stay home, we miss what God is doing. And you never know when God's going to do something amazing at church. Did you see what God did on church Sunday? No, I stayed home. Yeah. So if you want to experience Jesus, the resurrection life, don't stay home. Be a part of the fellowship. Go where Jesus is. When Jesus arrives, be there. Look at verse 21. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. And Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he'll rise again in the resurrection the last day. See, Martha had her act together here. I think she was really trusting that Jesus still could pull something out here. Verse 25, Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. And then he says, do you believe this? So Martha's definitely in a better place than Mary. But the key phrase here is the question. Do you believe this? He's asking her straight up, do you believe this? And I think Jesus is here today, right now, asking you and me, do you believe this? Do you believe that Jesus is the resurrection life? Do you believe he can raise you from the dead, not just the last day, but spiritually raise us today? Do you believe this? And there's a lot of good reasons to believe that Jesus was risen from the dead. In 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says, for what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures. And then we go to verse 5, and that he appeared to Peter, then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. And then he appeared to James, and then to all the apostles. And last of all, he appeared to me also. The resurrected living Jesus appeared to a whole bunch of people. So this wasn't just some kind of made-up thing. If you need some more evidential support for the resurrection of Jesus, let me suggest you look up Lee Strobel's book, The Case for Christ, because he goes into that. And I got to tell you, it's harder not to believe in the resurrection. It takes more faith not to believe in the resurrection, to believe in the resurrection, because the evidence is overwhelming. You can't make this stuff up the way that it's written down. So let's take a look at verse 27. And so Martha replies, yes, Lord. She told him, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who has come into the world. And after she said this, she went back and called to her sister Mary aside. The teacher's here, and he's asking for you. So Martha affirms she believes, goes to Mary, and she says, the teacher's here, and he's asking for you. Now, I got to tell you, when you believe in Jesus and you're excited about Jesus, one of the most natural things to do is to go to someone else and invite them to meet your Jesus. I want you to meet my Jesus. He's made a difference to my life. I wouldn't be here. I would not be a sane person today, and I'm not that sane, but I'm a lot saner than I would be if it weren't for Jesus. And so, you should make you cringe. If he'd be crazier, thank goodness for Jesus. And you see, it's natural. And so Martha's like, I got to go bring my sister. So she goes, the teacher's here, and he's asking. And see, the teacher's here in this church right now. Will you come? He's asking for you. He's asking for you. Do you hear him? Are you listening? If you want to experience Jesus as the resurrection of life, pay attention. Listen to his voice, because I guarantee you he's trying to call each and every one of you today to come to him. Okay? So how are you going to respond? How are you going to respond to Jesus? Well, let's look at Mary, verse 29. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. All right, there's a clue. Jump to verse 32. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. So when Mary heard that Jesus was asking for her, she got up immediately. She didn't wait around. She didn't visit her sister, her brother, or her mother, or his. She didn't call her therapist. She didn't call a hotline. She went to Jesus. And so that's what we do. But if we notice, though, she's still hurting. She's still feeling the pain. She's still disappointed. And that's exactly what we need to do. Instead of wallowing at home, when we're in that state where we're just really upset with God and the world, go to Jesus and pour out your complaint. Pour out your hurt. Pour out the pain in your life, because that's what he wants. And she falls at his feet and says, Lord, you've let me down. I'm hurt. My brother would be alive right now. And that's exactly what we need to do. If we're going to experience Jesus as the resurrection life, we need to learn the discipline of going to Jesus when we don't even believe in him, and just tell him how we feel in that moment. And while we're waiting for the miracle and it's not happening, go to Jesus. Okay? Do you think when you do that, he's going to be mad at you? Do you think he's going to reject you, be disappointed when we pour out our complaint? Well, let's look how Jesus responded to Mary when she did that. Verse 33. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. There it is, that famous verse, shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. And the Jews said, see how he loved him. So Mary's pouring out her heart, her disappointment, and Jesus doesn't reject her. He loves her. Man, he's moved. He's troubled. Jesus weeps. Do you ever realize that God cries? Think about that. God cries. He feels our pain. He feels our suffering. He's not up there distant, uncaring. He's with us. Even though Jesus knew he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead, he was feeling the pain that we go through when things aren't right in the moment. He empathizes with us. He cares. See how he loves her? Do you see how he loves us? Because he does. So much that he weeps for us. So if you're ever going to experience Jesus' the resurrection life, we need to always believe that Jesus loves us, no matter what. It, like Eliab said, it can't be earned, can't be worked for, can't be deserved, and because we didn't earn it, it can't be taken away. There's nothing that's going to happen that'll take God's love away. And you got to just hold on to that love to get to the miracle. Okay? And then the great part of the story, starting in verse 38, Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, Martha said, the sister of the dead man, by this time there's a bad odor, for he's been there 4 days. I mean, this is getting pretty realistic, isn't it? A little bit too real. And then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believed, you'd see the glory of God? I mean, and I love the phrase, take away the stone. Isn't that great? Take away the stone. Some of us are imprisoned in tombs of our hurts, hang-ups, and habits. Some of us are entombed with fear, depression, insecurity, fear, worry. How many of you like to worry? How many wake up in the middle of the night and are worried, imprisoned? We all are in our various tombs, our ambitions, our selfishness, our character defects, our control issues. We're in prison. And Jesus says, take the stone away. He wants us to be free from that. He wants us to walk out of our tombs. And the stone is taken away. When Jesus rose from the dead, the stone was taken away. The big question here is, do you really want to step out of your tomb? You have the faith and the courage to step out. And I kind of like it in here. This is my go-to. I like to feel sorry for myself in my little tomb. But the stone is rolled away. And I got to tell you, if you want to experience Jesus' resurrection life, you got to walk out of your tomb. That's just how it is. And finally, look in verse 41. So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you've heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. And when he had said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man came out, and his hands and his feet were wrapped with strips of linen, and a cloth was around his face. And Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. Wow. I mean, that's like, this is the earliest rendition of the mummy that we've got. I mean, it's right here. It must have been a sight. And everybody's just like, what is this? And can you imagine Lazarus? You know, it's just, and so now I've thought this too. Some of us are Christians. We've been Christians a long time, been in the church a long time. But I got to tell you, I've known some Christians who've been a Christian a long time, and you're still walking around with your grave cloths. Still got old things that you just haven't quite let go of. And even today, some of us need to take the grave cloths off and be set free. And we see that Jesus not only rose from the dead himself, Jesus can raise us. But at each point, there is something for us to do, to participate. He doesn't wave the resurrection over us like a magic wand. He says, this is something you have to participate in. This new life I'm offering to you as a gift. You need to embrace it. The question is, are you? Hopefully one of the phrases I've talked about today have touched, rang a bell for you, but Jesus is the resurrection life. It's a fact. It's a powerful reason to trust him and believe in him, follow him, and give your life to him. And I'd like to give each of you an opportunity to make a decision to do that today, okay? And to do that, though, I'm going to end with a little video that we got that I think makes a good appeal. And then after that, I'm going to come back up. We're going to have time for prayer. And if you would like to make a decision, maybe you just need prayer, we invite you to come forward, and Mike and Lauren will be up here to pray with you. Or if you don't want to walk all the way up, while everybody's heads are bowed, you could raise your hand. And I got some people lined up to come pray with you, okay? So that's what we're going to do. So let's watch the video, and then I'll come back and we can do that.